Today we are celebrating what is called Meat Fair Sunday. I sent the email out about the fasting. We've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it some more later. You can read the emails, and there's also some things about these in the bulletin. But I want to focus today on the content of what we heard in the gospel, and it's especially relevant for us today because of the icon workshop going on. We hear about a great king who is obviously Jesus, the judge, who will come at the end of all time. And he separates all the nations like sheep and goats. Right? Now, sheep and goats. Goats often get a bad rap in the Bible, right? Goats are nice. I had a pet goat when I was a kid. But they don't follow very well. Sheep, if you've ever seen a shepherd with the sheep, if you go to the Holy Land today, you'll see some of the Bedouin shepherds out there still in the hills. And the sheep stay in a little group. And the shepherd of sheep is usually sitting with his donkey under the shade of one of the little trees there. And the sheep kind of stay together. And once in a while, one starts to kind of get lost. Not intentionally, but they're eating, and they're not very bright. So and the shepherd gets up and makes a little noise, and the sheep comes back. But sheep are naturally a herding animal. They follow. When I was in my bachelor's degree, some of you may know it was in preparing to go on to veterinary school. And one of my classes was this sheep class. 2 semesters of sheep. And our lab was out in the field. And I remember the first sheep lab we had. We went out in the field with the man who was in charge of the sheep, the head of the sheep department, I guess. And he had about 20 students. We were in the barn. And out in the field, this huge field, were about 100 sheep out there. And he said, now we're going to bring these sheep into the barn where we're all standing right now. Okay, where are the dogs? Where are the four-wheelers? How do we do that? And he said, it's very simple. I'm going to need a couple of volunteers. I raised my hand. I was always like that in school. So, I'll do it. So he said, all right, you first. You are going to walk straight toward that herd of sheep. And what they're going to do is when they see you, they're going to look up, and then they're going to keep eating. They're going to look up, and they're going to start to get a little nervous. And they'll start to make a lot of noise. But they're going to all kind of start to back away from you. But they'll keep eating, because that's all they want to do is eat grass. They're sheep. So he said, they'll just kind of slowly back away and make room for you as you come, and they'll be making a lot of noise. But you ignore that. You walk right slowly and calmly into the herd of sheep. Into the middle. And they'll make a semicircle around you. You'll see. They'll do it on their own. And then you just simply turn around and begin to walk back slowly to the barn. And they'll follow you. Now, I had a pet goat. So I did as he said. And he sent a couple of students out to get the stragglers. He said, I want a couple other students to go way out on the edge of the field and just slowly approach from the back and the sides. And that way, if one sheep gets a little confused, it'll know which way to go toward the herd. It was unbelievable. No dogs, no fences, no nothing. I just walked out there. They made a lot of noise. And then I turned around, surrounded by these sheep. And then I started walking, and they kept eating. And they'd eat and walk and follow me, and they keep eating. And before I knew it, I'd walked all the way back into the barn, and all the sheep had gathered in. Those are sheep. It's part of their instinct. They're naturally a herding animal. And they follow whatever's in front of them. Ideally, and much better, if it's their shepherd. Now, what about a goat? Goats are very different. My pet goat, when I would turn my back on it, you know what it would do? It would either just ignore me and keep eating the grass or whatever it wanted to eat, or if it wanted to, it would run up and hit me with the horns. For fun. I'd turn around, what'd I do? And then it would start eating grass again. That's what goats do. They don't naturally follow. And in fact, I remember last summer when I was in Jericho. When I was in Jericho last summer, there were some pilgrims, And we were talking about the place, and one of the tour guides was talking. And as we're talking, I look down the hill, and there's a poor boy of Jericho. I say poor not because of how much money he had, but because he was a shepherd of goats and not sheep. I watched him shepherd these goats. He had about 10 of them. It was a full-time job. He was running, he had a big stick, and he was whacking the stick on the ground, trying to get the goats to move along, and yelling and screaming. He was picking up handfuls of rocks and throwing them at them to get the goats to just move. So you shepherd goats from the back by kind of pushing them, and it's like herding cats. Okay, they just keep going this way and that way. And then you run around and whack something and throw a rock, and they kept going. So I watched about 20 minutes as this guy took these sheep not very far, these goats not very far. Very different. And I remember that day, it really struck me how different it was of shepherding the two different types of animals. Goats are a solitary animal. They tend to live by themselves in the hills, with maybe a baby or two or a small group, but they never really herd like sheep do. And that's why in the Bible we hear about the wicked are like goats. Right? Jesus has come as the good shepherd, and he finds the nations. He reveals himself to the nations. This is the age of the church. And some follow him like sheep. But others are like goats. It doesn't matter how many times he whacks the stick on the ground or makes noise and hollers. They just ignore him. And so Jesus says that at the end of time, when he comes to judge the earth, it will be like a shepherd separating the sheep from the goats. Those who have followed the shepherd and those who have not. But what is striking about this story, we all know about this idea of the judgment. What's striking about this story is what Jesus says next. He says to those on his right, the sheep, the ones who have followed him, he says, "Blessed are you. Enter into the kingdom prepared. The kingdom of my Father." And he says, "For you fed me, you clothed me, you visited me." And they say, "When did we do this?" And he says, "When you did it for the least of my brethren." But then he turns to the goats, to the rebels, and he says, "Likewise." And they say, When? When did we see you like this?" And he says, "When you didn't do it to the least of my brethren. You didn't do it for me." And then they are sent off to the lake of fire, to eternal damnation with the rebellious angels, with the rest of the rebellious creation, right? Satan and his minions. And the sheep, the Christians who have followed Christ, enter into eternal rest. What Christ is talking about is how each and every one of us is an icon, an image of Christ. Why do we venerate the saints in these images of icons? Saint Barbara, Saint Elias, Antonios, right? Saint Catherine. We have these beautiful saints, these images, but what are they? In essence, each one of these is an image painted on wood of a great saint, a holy one from salvation history. From the history of the Old Testament, the New Testament, history of the church. And we venerate them, don't we? We come into the church and we kiss them. We light candles in front of them. We treat them with great honor and respect. Would that we treated with that kind of respect and honor the icon sitting next to us in the pew. Because there is the true icon of Jesus Christ. There is a living icon. This, with all due respect to the iconographer, this is wood and paint. And there is a lot of prayer and tradition and beauty that goes into the creation of an icon. However, you are the image and likeness of God. You have been refashioned into the image and likeness of God through your baptism into Christ. All Christians have a dignity that far surpasses wood and paint, that someday will disintegrate and return to the dust. And we may die and disintegrate and return to the dust, our material bodies, like the paint and the wood. But the difference of this image to which I'm referring is resurrection. Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead. And as St. Paul says, you who have been baptized into Christ have been buried with Him and have been raised with Him to newness of life. And if we have died in a death like His, we surely shall be raised in a resurrection like His. These bodies we have right now will be someday raised from the dead. Surely different. You might say, Abuna, I don't want this one back. My elbow hurts, my back, it hurts, I'm old. St. Paul says the body that comes forth from the earth is as different as the wheat that sprouts from the seed that was planted. So don't worry, your arthritis will be gone. But how do we treat this body of ours? And how do we treat the body of the icon sitting next to us in the pew? How do we treat the body, the icon of Christ, of our fellow Christian, who we might find on the street, who we might find out there in the world, in the neighborhood, in our own family? Our brothers and sisters, our parents, our children, our cousins, our neighbor. Do we treat them with the respect and the honor and the love that we often show to wood and paint that will not be raised from the dead? And this is what Christ is talking about in this Holy Gospel. And the Church gives us this Gospel reading now as we enter into Holy Lent, the holy and great fast, as we prepare ourselves to remember, as St. Paul said in his epistle today as well, to love our brother. To love our brother. As we fast, we need to incorporate mind, body, and spirit, as we spoke last time during our last fast. And we'll talk again about that. But remember, during the great fast, we do not only give up this food or that food. We not only fast from foods, but we also increase our prayer and our almsgiving, right? Our help for those who are around us. And so the Gospel today reminds us that as we enter into the great time of the fast, as we're preparing for our meals and what we're going to be doing with all of that, as we begin to think of how we're going to increase our prayer life in the church and at home, we also need to make sure that we are focused on our charitable acts to those around us, our almsgiving as well, so that Jesus Christ may be glorified in all things with His eternal Father and His all-holy life-giving Spirit, both now and ever and into ages of ages. Amen.